We've finally got our hands on one of these EV utes, and they reckon these things can do everything a standard dual cab can do. Is that all marketing rubbish or is it legit? We're about to find out. We're going to do a full bush to beach test, 4-wheel drive 24/7 style. So let's go. So what makes this thing behind me so appealing? 62k driveaway, 320 kilowatts of power, 650 newton meters of torque, a range of 800 kilometers, and fuel economy as good as 2 litres per 100. We're going to test how practical electric vehicles are in Australia by taking it on a long drive, sitting along the battery last, seeing how easy it is to charge,
and whether a hybrid EV makes sense outside of cities. BYD is one of many in-demand brands that are taking the Australian market by storm. The Shark 6's drivetrain is shaking up not only the dual cab sector, but the EV sector as well. So how does it all work?
Now, they do call this thing a plug-in hybrid, but it's a lot different to all the other generic hybrids you've got out there. It actually works like a conventional electric vehicle.
It has an electric motor on the front and on the rear axle. This means there's no drive shaft or transfer case like a traditional four-wheel drive.
In the front, it is a little bit different also, especially for a dual cab. It's got a 1.5 litre petrol turbocharged engine. Now, most of the time, this thing just acts as a generator to charge your batteries, but when you put your foot down flat out or you're traveling at higher speeds, this engine will power the front wheels only to help save your batteries a little bit. But it doesn't do that all the time. Depending on what mode you're on the inside of the vehicle, the electric motors are capable of making the car travel up to 100 kilometers an hour just by themselves with no help from the petrol engine. Now, they reckon in these Sharks you can get 80, maybe up to 100 kilometers in EV mode, so just using the battery power. And if you put in hybrid mode and use the petrol engine, you can get up to 800 kilometers range, which is pretty good in saying that if your commute to work was under 80 kilometers each way or even return, that means you could run this car on full EV mode and never have to put petrol in it ever, which is actually pretty good. And a good little tip there, I reckon, is if you're doing that using full EV mode, charge it at work and use their power. Don't charge it at home. The beauty of electric motors is there's no turbo lag, there's no transmission or even gears in this vehicle. It's instant power delivery. You put your foot down and that 321 kilowatts and 650 newton meters is straight down and it's super fast. We can go from 0 to 100 in 5.7 seconds. I'm going to come to a complete stop here and put it in sports mode and put my foot flat to the floor and see how we go. Oh, broke traction on all 4 wheels, threw us back in the seat at 100 already. That's incredible. It's actually 0.2 of a second quicker than the new petrol turbocharged Ranger Raptor. So those electric motors, instant power. Crazy.
The BYD doesn't have diff locks or low range, which are commonplace on the modern dual cabs. However, the Shark's unique motor setup allows for multi-terrain traction control modes. Let's see if this tech wizardry can make up for lack of traditional four-wheel drive features.
It's going to try and take off on this steep loose hill. Apparently these things aren't great with gearing to take off. Obviously there's a lot of torque here, but taking off on flat, definitely taking off on a hill takes a little bit out of it because there's no actual low range in this. So I'm going to take off here and see if it struggles. And if it does struggle, see if it actually can get going. It's quite loose. Bit of slipping. I can feel the traction control working. The petrol engine has kicked in. I think there's a lot of front drive and not much back. Could be stuck here. Here we go, it is climbing up. Took a little bit for that traction control to kick in. There we go. Like I said, it doesn't have a transfer case, you can't put it in low range, but what I did forget is it's got a couple of driving modes. So what I can do here, it's got muddy land, sand land mode, and there's another one, mountain. So I'm gonna put it on a mountain because we're on a bit of a hill and see if that makes a difference to anything. Obviously we do have fully inflated tires on this too, it's a bit of a loose hill, but I'm just going to try and take off and see if the mountain mode makes any difference. Oh, chalk and cheese. Chalk and cheese. Like I said, I think in normal eco mode there was a lot more front drive than rear drive, but put that in mountain mode and it took off like it was nothing.
A major consideration for off-road capability is the approach and departure angle. From the factory, the Shark has an approach angle of 31 degrees and a departure of 19.3 and a ramp over of 17 degrees, which we found occasionally scraped on the more aggressive washouts. But these can all be improved with some bar work, lift and tyres. Let's get it up on the hoist and have a look underneath before we tackle some tougher tracks.
This bash plate is actually spaced down off the chassis, so the battery is actually lower than the chassis rail height. There is a bit of foam in there to take the hit in the secondary bash plate, but if you did come down really hard, there is a chance that you could bottom the bash plate out in the battery, even pierce at worst case scenario. It's just one thing to keep in mind if you're on a track where you're scraping over rocks and stuff like that. The back suspension setup on this Shark is pretty different to most of the dual cabs out there. Obviously, they're a solid axle. Most of the time Leaf, some of them Core. This thing is a double wishbone independent setup. Now that is great for comfort on and off road, but can make things a little bit tricky when you're doing lift kits. Obviously, it is a more comprehensive setup, and maintenance can be way more expensive because you get so many bushes and more moving parts. Also, wheel alignments can be a bit of an issue because there's so many things to knock out of alignment.
Another cool thing about being independent front and rear is the diff clearance you have. Obviously, you're going to have better diff clearance than any other dual cab on the market because some of them are independent front but solid rear. It's all well and good to discuss clearances, angles and suspension, but let's see how it performs on this rocky hill climb. I'm in mountain mode because I'm going up a mountain pretty much. Traction control does seem to work pretty well. Some traction controls you need a fair bit of wheel pace too. Driving through it okay, nice and slow, doesn't need too much momentum. If we had a standard dual cab there that was unlocked, wouldn't have driven it. Rear locker, we would have got it, but unlocked vehicle wouldn't have driven that. So this traction control, good as a factory rear locker, I'm going to say. Some big rock steps up ahead. I'm interested to see how it goes there. See, this could be a drama. I'm at full throttle there and it's not going up. So I'll just reverse back a little bit. See if we can go. I don't want to hit it too hard, just get this ABS working. Oh, that's my foot to the floor. And it just doesn't have the torque to pull up. I might go back and realign. There you go, showstopper. If there's anything steep, you've got to roll into it. Not ideal off-road, so this is where having a transfer case in real low range would definitely help. You've really got to give it a bump because it doesn't have the torque to crawl super slow. It's going down the hill there, a little bit of a wheel lift in the back. I don't think it has a great deal of wheel travel. Obviously it is standard suspension, so hopefully there's a bit of room for movement there. So yeah, I think that's just due to lack of wheel travel on the standard suspension. Obviously great for road, but start getting this tougher stuff will be not the best situation. While the Shark does lack low range, the EV does have a unique advantage when tackling steep descents off-road: the regen braking. This system is completely new to me, so I've brought along Ian from Bendix, who's an expert in all things brakes and has been dealing with EVs for a while now.
There's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding about regen braking, and firstly, it's got nothing to do with this. You got those electric motors that drive the car forward. Those electric motors, when you're going down a hill, uses the car's momentum and they work in reverse, and they're a generator. So that just puts that power back into your battery, but it also slows you down because there's a lot of resistance there.
It's kind of like driving a manual in a low gear, it just really pulls you up.
Your service brakes, which are a conventional brake like you'd have on any other car and still works on the pedal, they don't wear out as quickly and they don't get as hot. Because they don't get hot, the first application might not give you as much stopping power as you're expecting.
With regen braking being the primary way to slow the car down, the disc brakes often become underused. This can lead to issues in the long run where the components don't behave as expected. Fortunately though, Bendix has a few options for your EV depending on how you use it.
If you're using your vehicle around town, we have a solution which is designed specifically for EVs, so they're designed to be used from cold, so that gives you a good bite when it's cold. It also is very low noise, so because the car's so quiet, the last thing you want is that sort of really, any noise is noticeable. Ceramic material actually puts a transfer layer onto the rotor, so it leaves a loss on the rotor, so that'll give you a bit of protection from corrosion as well. If you're towing lots like we have been, and you probably want to go to something a bit more heavy duty and a bit more, full drive, so the alt full drive would be our recommendation.
So the rear of this Shark, Ian, is a lot different to any other ute I've seen. The suspension setup reminds me a lot of a Y62, and another thing that's different for a ute is it's got disc brakes on the back.
Up until recently, pretty much every dual cab ute's had drum brakes, and it makes a really big difference for a ute. When you load this tub up, it'll carry 800 kilos. You're about 50-50, so about 50% of your braking effort's going to come from the rear. And interestingly, it's a really big rotor, so it's actually a bigger rotor on the rear than it is on the front. So it'll mean is that pad will probably wear out faster, but that big rotor gives you a really good stopping effort.
Yeah, most definitely, it's massive.
Yeah.
So far, the multi-terrain traction control modes have held up alright, but let's take it onto some real soft sand and see if we can find its limits.
Copy?
Yep, gotcha.
So it's really soft and camera guy's a bit bogged. Might get you guys to come down and did you have the deflator with you?
Yeah, we got one with us.
The cameraman has got very stuck, they're stuck and they're very stuck. It's on the chassis. lower pressures, and a driver mod, and the camera car popped right out. It just goes to show how soft this beach actually is. I'm a little worried we're going to get this Shark beached.
We've got the tyres down low. We've got it in sand land mode. Bumpy on entry.
Still better than the camera car.
Yeah. It's good, there's no lag at all.
How cool is that?
Yeah. You know, this is pretty heavy for a dual cab. It's sort of floating on top. I thought EV was something that couldn't go on the beach. It's doing it really easily, hardly any throttle. Very impressive. This thing tears at 2.7 tonne, which means I've gone a little bit lower the pressure. I've gone down to 14 PSI all round, but in saying that, 14 PSI is doing the job perfectly. There's some big soft sand ruts and it's cruising along. One thing I am noticing a bit, obviously it is standard height, but I'm bellying out a little bit on the middle and the front. I can just feel it just hitting the sand, but it's not slowing us down. It's obviously nice skid plates, it skids it all the way along. Quite impressive, this vehicle so far.
Depending on the spec, you're looking at comparable tear weights of a Ranger Raptor at around 2.5 tonne. A Hilux SR5 is 2.1 tonne, and the D-Max coming in about the same. The Shark is one heavy ute.
Probably about halfway up our beach run now, and what I did before I jumped on the beach was put it in full EV mode, so no petrol help at all from the engine, and it's gone from 66 down to 46. I've probably done almost, 10 Ks up the beach, which sounds like a lot, 20% of battery, but if you live close, you could probably still leave home, drive up the beach, have a swim, have lunch with the family, and drive home and plug it in. If you're going a bigger trip on an island, Fraser, Morton or something, you'd probably run the engine to help a little bit, but it's definitely not chewing it as much as I thought it would. This is pretty soft sand and it's tracking along super easy. As you can probably see out my window here, I've been here for about 15 minutes and we've seen so many cars get bogged. The BYD Shark cruising straight past them all. I almost feel a bit mad at myself. Being an older four-wheel drive enthusiast, I thought I would hate this car.
Things were going so well in the Shark, but my little brag must have been heard by the internal combustion gods, and we've found the limits of Sandland mode.
Even they're sort of struggling, but it's...
Oh no!
Maybe I just got stuck then.
Oh, the wheel's still spinning. Wow.
Well... I've just turned around and gone to cross rut and my opposite wheels are spinning, so the traction control isn't kicking in very well. I may have to get out and do some digging here, we'll have to see.
High tide and bogged to the chassis. Not where you want to be with a brand new car. I can't imagine that big battery is too fond of salt water.
I've done a bit of digging, I don't like my chances. It's pretty hard down. Fingers crossed it pops out backwards. Camera crew to the rescue. Nothing like a good bit of old fossil fuels to get you out. I'm ready when you're ready, Ian. Hopefully I don't need too much. That's me, I'm out. Thank you. There you have it. I think that would have happened to any four-wheel drive in those circumstances. We turned around and the beach was quite steep. And the traction control didn't quite kick in. So yeah, we just sort of sunk, but as you see, it didn't need too much. I reckon any vehicle would have got stuck. But it could also be because this thing was 2.7 tonne with nothing in it, because the big battery makes it a bit heavier. Not too sure which one it was. Could have been driver error too, but I highly doubt it. So anyway, we'll keep on testing this thing up the beach so we can get this battery to charge up.
Despite that little mishap, the Shark impressed me on the beach. It handled the bumps and ruts very well. Even the battery didn't seem to complain. I'd have no hesitations taking this thing on a longer trip to Fraser or Morton, but I'd probably avoid high tide next time. Now, we're going to hook up a caravan and see how it handles the extra weight.
We really want to see how this thing tows, so we've slapped the Lifestyle Icon E2E on the back of the BYD Shark. Now these things can apparently tow 2.5 tonne on paper, but I've heard the gearing on these things can be a bit of a drama on hills or off-road terrain, so we've thrown it on the back, we've got it all hooked up. I'm going to jump in here, put some Ks down, find some hills, and get back to you guys on how this thing actually tows.
This vehicle did not have a trailer brake controller, so we're using the opportunity to test with a Bendix new product, which is our ultimate tow portable trailer brake controller. We'll just make jump in any car, any trailer. It takes about 10 minutes to set up and fully compliant trailer brakes, and off you go.
Definitely does have power to pull, doesn't
It's got some kahunas.
Yeah.
And it just gives you a shove in the back.
Yeah.
And you don't know you got 1.6 tonne on the back.
Not at all.
And also just the chassis seems to handle it pretty well. It's not pushing it around.
Yeah, and that road was pretty rough back there. Lots of potholes, and the car just was planted.
That's it. Not a bad turning circle.
Yeah, that was impressive.
Very good. Got a bit of a hill coming up. Keen to see how it handles it. I've heard these things aren't the best for hills. When towing, it even says when it goes in towing mode, try and tow on flat road as possible. Not the biggest hill. I can hear the petrol engine revving, but didn't have to put my foot down anymore.
Yeah, really impressive.
One thing that I do really like about towing in the Shark, you take your foot off and the regen braking really just pulls the car up, and I don't actually have to use the foot brake too much unless I'm coming to a halt at a T road or a set of lights or something. The payload on this Shark is 790 kilograms. Now it seems like a lot. I thought that is a lot, but you start taking things away like the ball weight of the caravan, that is 200 kilos, so we're down to 590. Also, the front axle is kind of going to be close to its limit if you do some full driver mods up there. You've only got 119 kilograms left, so by the time you put a bull bar on, a winch, it's going to be very close to being overloaded on the front axle. So obviously by the time you add all those things, you are going to be very close, if not over your GVM. So until there's a GVM upgrade, which I'm sure some manufacturers will come out with eventually, you're just going to have to keep an eye out on those weights, because GVM weights and towing weights are definitely something that the authorities are onto these days. So just make sure you calculate all your numbers so when you are on your road trip with your family, everything's nice and safe and you are legal. Now, around most towns and cities, I'm going to say on the East Coast, you'll be pretty fine with charging stations. They're here about everywhere. If you're in more rural areas, it is still going to work. You can get your own charger fitted at your workplace or at your house. It's just going to charge at a slower rate. It's probably just going to be a little bit easier and definitely quicker if you sort of round closer to a city or a town. Under the back seat in the BYD, there is an inverter that supports both AC and DC charging. Now, the AC power, it only charges at 7 kilowatt though, so charging this from 25% to full will take around about 4 to 7 hours, which is fine if you're doing it overnight at home or even while you're at work during the day. But if you're on a road trip, you want to make sure you find a DC charger, because these things can charge with up to 55 kilowatt and take this from 25% up to 100% in only about 40 minutes. Our experience at charge stations varied. We tried to use the Tesla charger. The plug did fit, but it wouldn't charge. At some charging stations, you also need to bring your own cable. Small things like that made my brief ownership of an EV a little inconvenient, but once we figured it all out, the charging stations actually became pretty easy to use. You pull up and either pay from your phone with an app or just tap your card on the charger itself, plug it in and wait for your card to be deducted the final amount. Rates vary, but here's one of our receipts. 40 minutes to full, 22 kilowatts provided at a cost of $14.73. There's no denying it can be a very cost-effective commuter, but the economy suffers when you start towing, as Ian found out on the commute up to Newcastle.
Look, this thing is awesome on the road to tow with. It does a fantastic job. That's, I suppose, at the expense of fuel range.
On Ian's run from Sydney to Newcastle, he averaged 20 litres per 100 on the highway, towing 1.8 tonne. Not really that impressive, but let's see how it goes without the camper on the back. We're out of the bush now, but just jumped back on the highway, so we're doing the Newcastle to Sydney run, not towing. That's more like it, 7.7 litres to the 100, not towing, in hybrid EV mode. If the battery is fully charged and use EV only mode, you could almost do that run without consuming any petrol. So there you have it, the Shark performs better than your average dual cab ute on the highway when it's in hybrid EV mode, but performs worse when towing. In a competing dual cab, you'd expect to see closer to 17 litres per 100 or below with 1.8 tonne on the back. Well, there you have it. That is our test on the BYD Shark 6. We've done some towing, we've done some road driving, we've done some beach driving, some dirt road driving, and then we did some tougher tracks. Track control worked awesome and I was impressed, but it just comes down to not having an actual low range in the transfer case. When you're on sort of bigger steps and steeper inclines, it just doesn't want to go up unless you get a bit of a run up, and that can get dangerous. Do they have a place though for Australian four-wheel drivers? Most definitely. This is perfect if you live close to a beach, you want to do some beach runs. If you've got a small caravan and you do want to tow it somewhere, you still can do that too. Plenty of room in the back if you do a heap of city driving, you want to save on fuel. But do we think this thing would withstand one of our four-wheel drive 24/7 trips? I really don't think it would. Would I buy it as a hardcore four-wheel driver? Definitely not. It wouldn't suit me. What do you guys think in the comments below? Would you own one? Do you think we should try and take one on a trip? And do you think it would last?